Hi, I'm Arthur. And today I try to simplify and explain why these guys have permanent scowls on the face of their angry helmet. Power armor is a fun concept. It's basically a mech suit but tiny, and for the uninitiated, what power armor is a suit of armor usually powered by some kind of atomic source, though it doesn't have to be. And with this power, it's able to amplify the abilities of its wearer. Like, imagine each hand has the equivalent of a hydraulic press built into its fingers. It's kinda like that. Each Space Marine, if they live past being a scout, are able to don these armor suits, each one being tailored to make a Space Marine's strengths even stronger. One of the last augmentations that a Space Marine goes through is the Black Carapace. It's pretty simple. It's essentially a second skin to replace the old skin with nifty techno holes that connect to the interior mechanisms of their power armor that allows them to control the suit more effortlessly, causing it to sync up with their nervous system and shit. Basically, it's now controlled like a second set of skin rather than a suit of armor that they're wearing. Yeah, that's something to take in. The Space Marine, whose physical strength is so up there, they could grab you and crack your skull with one hand, given a suit of armor that basically doubles their already astounding strength. Everyone looking at this, you'd think the armor would slow them down a little bit, considering it's like multiple tons of metal, plastic, computers, and a small reactor in the backpack, but nah. Turns out, they barely get slowed down because of the weird connection hole thing. In the creation of Space Marine's armor, there have been dozens of variants. I'm going to cover all the basic levels of Space Marine power armor, and before you ask, no, I'm not going to touch the heavier armors known as Terminator armor. I kind of want to save those for their own video because Terminator armor is fucking cool, and also there's a lot of other variants for it. There's about 5 or 6 if I'm thinking of correctly. So, to start, the first and the worst of the power armor, the Mark I Thunder armor. God, that looks so fucking goofy. Named due to the thunder patterns all across the armor, as well as the original wielders of the armor being the Thunder Warriors. The armor itself was barely functioning, only the top half of it was powered, meaning good luck going faster than a fucking crawl when wearing this thing. It was super fucking heavy, and the legs weren't powered, meaning there wasn't any servo holding it up, it was just you. One last little tidbit about this one. As power armor goes, it wasn't a self-contained system, so it could not survive void warfare, meaning there was no rebreather. Next up, the first major improvement to power armor, which was the Mark II Crusade armor. Now this is fucking cool. I love the design of the Crusade armor and the next variant of the armor itself. It's mostly because I love the Iron Warriors, which tended to use those two armors together a lot. As you can tell, this armor is a significant improvement. The systems are now self-contained and can withhold the vacuum of space, or at least no oxygen. They'd probably still freeze to death after a little bit. The legs actually were powered now, so the Space Marines can now sprint if they wanted. The armor itself is using a fantasy metal known as ceramite, which is, this super fantastical sci-fi metal that is both more durable and lighter than steel. So after the Mark II armor, each variant is more of a side grade with additional benefits than a true and honest upgrade for a little bit. The next Mark is a good example of that. The Mark III Iron armor. Very similar in design to the Mark II, with significantly denser armor plating. It's a little bit slower, but the purpose of iron armor is strictly defensive, sacrificing speed and reactiveness to basically give you more defensive properties. Usually they would still use iron armor if they were a type of legion that specialized in fighting in areas without a lot of cover. The next piece of armor has slightly less defense than the Mark III, but significantly more movement capabilities and ease of use than the Mark II and III. The Mark IV Maximus armor. This shit, probably one of my favorites. I really like the fact that in lore, it was a streamlined design made for ease of use. It is apparently one of the best suits of power armor to use and looks very pretty. Some of the best examples of the Mark IV armor would be in The Emperor's Children, with that very Phoenician purple, silver, and gold look. It makes the traits of the armor pop very, very well. Without the bulkiness of the Mark III, it's very useful for legions like that who specialize in, faster, more reactive combat. Next one is a weird one, where each armor set, as I mentioned, is a cheeky side grade up to this point. This one is a downgrade specifically for every battlefield role that the others occupied. But when you're off the battlefield, it's kind of better. Let me try and explain. This is the Mark V Heresy era armor, or the Heresy pattern armor. This one is less streamlined, less durable, less reactive than the prior marks of armor. Like, you see those studs on the armor? Those are actually molecular bonding studs. Think of them as very high-tech sci-fi rivets that are not there for any defensive reason. They're there to actually hold the armor together. So why was this armor used? Well, it was created during a time when supply lines as well as manufactorum locations kinda weren't working at peak capacity, if my recollection of the Horus Heresy is correct. So these had to do. The benefits, they were pretty easy to put together and mass produce, as well as pretty easy to repair, modify, and replace missing bits because they were just so cheap to make. So in bulk, you could have armored space marines go into the battle, get their armor torn to shit, come back, get a new suit of armor, and be fine. They were shitty, broke a lot, but you could easily swap out the pieces of armor, add new layers to increase the defensive capability, and it's still fucking power armor. Your rifle is probably going to plink off it like you're flicking a bottle cap at a tank. So what really is the difference at the low end of things in comparison to the high when not fighting a space marine? Next up is a true upgrade on the prior marks of armor. The Mark VI Corvus armor. The cheeky beakies! With even lighter armor than in comparison to the Mark IV, and even more streamlined approach as well, it definitely had noticeably weaker defensive capabilities, but it made up for it by being the most reactive and quickest armor to use at that time. It wasn't 100% silent, but it was very stealthy. The streamlining of the armor made use of it super easy, and mobility a lot easier as well. And due to the fact that it had significantly decreased defensive capabilities, some legions actually hated the armor. They thought it was completely useless for how they fought. Good example, Iron Warriors? Hated. They thought it was garbage, useless to them completely. They preferred the Iron and Crusade patterns of armor just because they were heavier and allowed their form of warfare to be better implemented. The next mark of armor, generally speaking, is the best up to this point in all categories. The Mark VII Aquila pattern armor. So to explain the name of the armor, the Aquila is the symbol of the Emperor of Mankind. No one was allowed to wear the Aquila on their armor except for the Emperor's children, thus where the name came from. But, as you could probably tell, the Emperor's children did not turn out that well. So eventually they were like, fuck it. Do you align yourself with the four Satans? No? Cool, wear the bird now. What can I say about this design that hasn't been already said? This look is fucking awesome. It's iconic. It has average durability, more than the Corvus pattern and Maximus, but less than the Iron armor. It isn't as streamlined and quick as the Corvus, but it's more than the Maximus from what I've read about. It's basically the Goldilocks armor. It's efficient and just good, and also looks consistently unhappy at all times. There was one more mark of traditional power armor invented before things got a complete rework, which I don't think sums up the weirdness of this armor. Essentially, after the Horus Heresy, there was like one more mark of power armor, which is insane considering how many were introduced during the Heresy. So in the several thousand years to follow, there was no modifications aside from the fucking Mark VIII errant armor, where they wanted to fill in the gap between defensive capabilities that was between the Mark VII and the Mark II. So they added a neck plate. There's probably some other internal mechanical differences, but it didn't work out. They actually agreed unanimously that the Mark VIII was a failure. So they went back to just using Mark VII Aquila pattern armor. Personally, I think the neck thing looks cool. I know that it's very stifling and actually limits mobility of the neck, but I think it looks cool. It's very Space Marine-y. So, as you could probably see, there was a lot of stagnation in between marks between the 7th and the 8th. So what happens next? Some giant spider crab robot man decided to do some heresy as a goof, as a bit of a joke even, and made a whole swath of new power armor for his new Space Marines, the Primaris Marines. It was so good that they skipped Mark IX. So you have the Mark X armors, which are divided into 3 categories. The main one that most people see in the day-to-day on the tabletop and in lore is the Tacticus armor, so Mark 10 Tacticus. It actually, in design philosophy, combines the best aspects of all armor prior, so strong armor plating like the Mark 3, a streamlined helmet like the Mark 4, and they are moderately easy to repair and replace like Mark 5. The Tacticus armor you would see pretty much everywhere. It's the main boots on the ground, bolter, rank and file armor. Then you have the variants of the Tacticus. So you have the Mark 10 Gravis plate, which is meant to be the chunkiest of boy armor when it comes to combat, being so thick that they lose a considerable amount of mobility in trade for considerable defensive capabilities. Of the generic Space Marine armor outside of Terminator, Gravis plate is physically the most durable, but they can only equip it to specific specialist units that specialize in close range or heavy attritionative warfare, because outside of that, it just wouldn't really matter. The lack of vision, lack of usability would not benefit anybody who's long range. This is meant for people who are going to get stuck in. And lastly, probably my favorite variant of the Mark 10, the Phobos pattern armor. Sometimes referred to as Reaver pattern because there is a certain variant of this that has a different helmet. It looks like a skull, which is dope as shit. It trades almost more durability than the Corvus pattern, but gives significantly more mobility and stealth capabilities than any of the other armors prior. It is considered one of the most silent armors, almost being completely silent, and you are almost not hindered at all in your movements while using this. This armor is used mostly for Vanguard deployment and stealthier deployments, with most people involved used in shock and awe, get in, get out type tactics, because it's not suitable for long drag-out brawls. So that was every variant of Space Marine power armor excluding Terminator armor. They each have a purpose and unique aesthetic. Personally, my favorites are probably 4, 5, and 10 Phobos. I just think they're neat. What do you think of all these armors? Which suits do you like the most and why? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to know, as per the usual, because I collect Horus Heresy miniatures. No one in my community really plays except for like me and maybe 3 other people. So for those who don't know, in the Horus Heresy, you can have a mix of these different variants of power armor up to I think Mark 6 now, and have them on the field. There's no like actual benefits for them. They're all basically the same thing rules wise, but you can aesthetically match them up. And I tend to lean towards Mark 4 a lot for my Night Lords, and Mark 3 and Mark 2 for my Iron Warriors. So I just want to know what you guys would think be the coolest to be on the field. And if I missed any of the power armor, let me know. I give you permission to be upset with me. Like and subscribe because I upload a lot. Oh, fuck! I forgot to mention the Aegis pattern armor the Grey Knights use. Yeah, there is a secret super Space Marine chapter that fights demons. They use silver, weird helmeted bolter wrist armor. Yeah. Okay, goodbye.